To get started, this is going to be on how to bid for a kingdom event. My name is Laryl, just Laryl. I have held several different crat positions at many different events, and I was also the autocrat responsible for the largest event we've had in Winter's Edge ever. So part of that was a good bid and a good plan, and this is how to do it. So, first step is definitely deciding that you want to bid. It is a really big decision, and it's not really one to be taken lightly because you're kind of setting the tone for 1 out of 4 events we have a year. Part of this is it's a lot of work. So are you going to have time outside of your everyday to plan this? As much as we enjoy Amtgard, it is still a hobby, and we all have families, we have our own other hobbies, we have jobs. So are you going to have time to fully plan and make props if you need them and acquire different materials and interface with your team, or is it just going to be too time consuming that you can't do it? Do remember that you don't have to autocrat by yourself. Co-autocrating is a really good way to kind of manage that workload and split it up between a couple of people. I've seen it done with people who actually live together, or with those who are in the same fighting company, or even just good friends who work well together and can break that up to kind of manage things a little bit better. You're going to be busy. I know that sounds the same as it's a lot of work, but what I mean by this is you're not going to an event like you normally would. If you're just attending an event, you can go do what classes you want and, sit down and hang out with a couple of friends for a couple hours, maybe watch the tournament, participate in all the battle games. While you can still participate to some level as an autocrat, it's definitely not the same. You're going to be stuck running around, fixing problems, maybe running to the store, dealing with a medical issue, making phone calls to the site runners. So if you have a detachment or another engagement at an event that you absolutely have to be at, autocrating that event may not be a good idea. And then experience without being the autocrat. There are ways to get that experience so that when you decide to bid, you know what you're doing. There is one that's not necessary, but we often have a shadowcrat at our events here in Winter's Edge. It's simply somebody who comes in and is shadowing the autocrat. They're there to learn. So they're kind of the right hand to the autocrat, and they'll do whatever's needed. There's plenty of crat positions that you can try out, and that gets you into that world where you see how the event is planned. You're in that chat and you are there for a lot of these decisions. And you can also just volunteer, teach a class at an event, jump in the kitchen, anything like that, help run a battle game. All of it helps you learn how to do this job, and that in turn helps with your bid. So, moving on to the next slide. After you decide that you want to bid on an event, which one do you want to bid on? We got 4 every year, and they're not all the same. So, do you want to go for an in-reign / coronation or a mid-reign? So it basically means, are you going for the tournaments or the battle games? It changes how your events are going to be run, and it changes the kind of crats and the kind of people that you're going to come up with. So that's really a big decision right there, is which one do you want? And also, if you're that kind of person who is at every tournament, you want to fight in every single one, maybe bid on a battle game event. So then that way you've got the tournament events free. Scheduled events, the biggest one is Nightings. Frankly, I couldn't think of much else other than nightings, except for maybe holidays. But scheduled events such as nightings at an event really change things. I know one of the reasons my event was the biggest was because there were multiple nightings, and some brought a lot of people from out of the kingdom. And so things like that really do change your attendance levels. They change your planning, your scheduling. It can change your feast. If there's a specific one that the knighted person really wants and the feast crat wants to make that happen. There's even an event coming up later this year where the knighted person's fighting company is willing to provide feasts, so that can actually make your job in bidding easier, because suddenly that frees up a lot of money. So it's definitely something to consider. Primitive camping or cabins. So sites in Winter's Edge are required to be set up and scheduled at least 9 months prior to the event. And you're only bidding on the event a couple months ahead of time. So all of these event sites have already been picked. That being said, they're not all the same. Some of them are very primitive, where it's camping and not so lovely bathrooms, where others are nice cushy cabins with AC. And so what kind of crats and what kind of, say, hydration and other accommodations you're going to have to plan for, it's going to be based on that. So those are some things you have to consider in your bid. On the other part of that is it going to be cold or is it going to be hot? If you're running an event in the winter time, some other costs you might have to include are things like firewood or warmed drinks, any things like that. And whereas if it's really hot outside, you're going to want more hydration. You're going to want to make sure that your feast is going to be something that cools people down but still has electrolytes. It's going to adjust your first aid, and it's going to adjust the comfort of your people, which will also in turn affect your attendance. And then location. Like I said, event sites are scheduled in advance, and if you're planning on running one, depending on your willingness to travel, do you want to be responsible for an event that's 8 hours from your house? Or are you more okay with having it be a little closer so you can do maybe a little bit more planning, go see the site yourself? For some people that doesn't matter, but for others, traveling that distance just isn't an option. So definitely keep it in mind when you're figuring out which event you want to bid for. Does anybody have any questions yet? There's going to be a question section at the end, but I'm talking a lot, so. Okay, moving on. Once you've decided that you want to bid and you've picked which event you want to bid on, that's when you start building your team. That's what you need first. Without people, you can't run an event. You definitely can't do it by yourself. You can either reach out to specific people. If you have somebody in mind for a different crap position, then you ask them directly. Or you can always put out a post on Facebook saying, hey, I want to bid. I'm looking for these specific roles. Is anybody interested? I have personally found that reaching out to people directly can get more people to say yes. Whereas when you put stuff out publicly, it may take a little bit of goading to get people to actually do it, but you are reaching people who you may not have talked to otherwise. So it's a give and take with both. And of course you could do both, especially if there's one specific or maybe a few roles that you're just having a hard time filling. Definitely reach out and see if people would want to do it. This one is kind of tricky, is can your team work together? This is the nice way to say, make sure you don't stick people together, for lack of better terms, who hate each other. We all love to be friends and have a great time, but you can't deny that this is a people game and there's drama sometimes. And so if two people have never gotten along, I wouldn't recommend putting them together in the kitchen or on another team. So try and make sure that your team can work together really well. And of course, it's never perfect, but it's just something to keep in mind as you're reaching out to individuals. Now, when it comes to experience for your team, of course, if somebody has done the job before and they did a good job at it, then yeah, that's a safe bet. New Krats, however, they can be really enthusiastic to, they want to come in and do a good job. They want to be seen. Anybody on the Rose Path, those are great people to bring in as new Krats, and a lot of the time they can bring in new ideas that you may not have thought of. A lot of these teams and a lot of the Krats tend to kind of do what the previous one did over and over, but if you get somebody new, they might have a new idea that suddenly revamps that role. And then when it comes to new Krats, it can be a little bit scary, but one thing that really helps is having a mentor or somebody who can help them run that particular role. So a great example of this is cleanup. We had a person who ran the cleanup team, and then next time at the next event, their beltling ran the cleanup team. They had never been a Krat before, so their beltling ran the team, but the previous Krat who still had experience was on that team. So if they needed help or advice or suddenly got in over their head, they could take over. And then the last one is, can you actually expect this person to do this job well? Do they show up to the things that they're saying they're going to do? When they've taken on leadership roles before, did they follow through? When they've said, hey, I'm going to do that thing, I'm going to make that craft, I'm going to make that scroll, did they finish? That can be a really big part of having a Krat, because there's a lot of Krat jobs that can get forgotten until the last second. And it sucks. As for the team you need, you have your essentials, and then you have the common ones, but you may not have to have it based on your event. So essentials here on the left are the autocrat, and that's you. Feast, because we gotta eat. War, so that's battle games, and it's usually the Kingdom Champion. However, the Kingdom Champion is able to name another war Krat. So if somebody is really looking to run some stuff at the kingdom level, or maybe that Kingdom Champion can't make it, you may have a different war Krat. So do keep that in mind, because that may affect what resources that they have. Gate is your sign-ins. If you don't have that, then nobody went to the event, because we don't have record of it. Medic. I know some people have thought about not having a medic Krat. It really is an essential part of a Krat team, just so that you have a specific person to go to when you need those band-aids and you need burn cream because somebody accidentally touched something hot in the kitchen, and just first aid only. There are some people who do believe that medic should be responsible for more than that. They should not. It is first aid only. Anything past that, 911 all day. As for Hydrocrat, that is absolutely an essential, and it does not include just water. There are other aspects to Hydro. I do have that on another slide. And then security and cleanup. So security, they're a little bit different. They're not, what you would think of as a security guard. They more make sure that people are following the rules of the site and of Amtgard. So they'll do regular checks to make sure that people aren't smoking inside buildings, or they'll keep an eye out for people who have given alcohol to minors, or just if they see anything that doesn't look quite right. That's what they're for. And when you are picking your security team, make sure that they know they cannot drink, at least not while they're on duty. And then cleanup, leaving the site better than we found it. That's always essential, because this is how we keep event sites and they let us come back. Other crats that you might have, it just depends on your site and your event, is the market crat. So that manages vendors. That will all depend on whether or not the site you have picked allows for vendors. So that's something that's set by the site. It's not set by the Kingdom Monarchy, so don't get mad at them. But if they allow it, then you're going to want a market crat, and they will manage the vendors for you. The Sioux crat is a new one as of a few years ago. They tend to be the right hand to the feast crat, and it's a really useful crat position to have. It kind of gives the feast crat a bit of a break. Somebody who can run stuff while they go take a nap and eat and maybe hang out with a friend for an hour. A&S, often this is the Kingdom Regent. However, it doesn't have to be. If there are classes being run, then they may have named a specific other A&S crat that will take care of running those classes. If the Dragon Master's going on, that will definitely be run by the Kingdom Regent. Poppet is going to be kids' activities. So you don't have to have kids' activities. It is often offered. It is not babysitting. Parents do still need to pay attention to their children, and they can't just drop them off and leave them all day long. And you will need at least 2. So if you do plan on having a Poppet team, you need to make sure that you get at least 2 people, just to keep in line with the corpora. Slackcrat is highly recommended, and it's kind of a catch-all. That's the person who's gonna help clean up, pick up the trash if they need it, or make a run to Walmart because we didn't buy enough bread. They fill whatever role is needed right then and there, and it is a huge help. Questcrat is self-explanatory. If you intend to have quests at your event, you may want one just to manage that. Cabin as well is very self-explanatory. If there are cabins at your event site, you may want a cabin crat. If there's enough cabins for far more people, then it may not be necessary. But your cabin crat also not only handles assigning cabins, but also making sure that they've been cleaned out at the end of the day, making sure people are getting up and getting out on Sunday. If they have AC, making sure all those are running well. So it's helpful. And then Shadow, as I said, is one that isn't essential. However, they can be that right hand to the autocrat. They can help and fill in roles as needed, and that's also a good way to get more people interested in autocratting in the future. So those are all the possibilities for your team, which it looks like a lot of people. It can be, but all these ones on the right are not always essential. So it'll be okay. And the budget. That is the thing that's always a little bit scary when people consider bidding. It's not as bad as it seems. And there will actually be, I've created a template that is in a Google Sheet for people to be able to copy. So if they want to bid, they can just take that and copy it, and you'll kind of have a little bit of a layout to fill in. You start with your fixed costs, and those usually they come from the Kingdom Prime Minister, and those are things that are not going to change. So the site cost and the insurance, those are the 2 big ones. They are going to be the most money and it's something that you can't change, so that's just, it is what it is. Other things are things like game supplies, printing, and cleaning supplies. So printing is going to be like your signage, your sign-in sheets, anything like that. All of those really aren't going to change that much with attendance, and so those you kind of want to fill in first and be done with. Your variable costs are going to change a lot based off of how many people come to your event. The big two are your meals and hydration. And hydration can also include not just your water, but also things like electrolyte drinks. Gatorade powder is not cheap. It's like $7 or $8 for just one of those big 5-gallon things full of Gatorade. It's like $7 or $8. So we go through a lot of it, and it can add up. There's also snacks like pickles and oranges. Those are commonly put out with hydration, especially at your tournament events to prevent cramping and in the extreme heat. So those costs do rack up. Sometimes hydration is listed under feast costs, so it can be a little bit weird. And then potential costs is kind of a catch-all, because some of these items might be provided by the site. Sometimes the site will give us trash bags. They'll give you paper towels and hand soap and toilet paper. They'll even, some of them have their own cutlery and like real plates and bowls and cups. Other sites provide none of that. And so you have to buy all of it, and it can get really, really expensive. So that's another thing you may want to consider when you're picking out which site you want to go with. If you're concerned about costs, maybe try and find an event that's using a site that provides a lot of those things. And then other potentials are going to be your decor. There are some decorations that Kingdoms will keep in the Regent supplies, but if you're looking for anything specific, if you're trying to run a specifically themed event, then you might have to buy some. Gate favors, we have these at a lot of our events. They're not a requirement, so you don't have to have them. But if you want them, then yeah, it's probably going to cost you. Pop-it crafts, if you are having children's activities and they intend to use any sort of supplies, those are going to cost. It's usually not much. Usually Pop-it can get away with maybe $50 or $100. And like I said, firewood for any events that have that option, that where you can have fires, and especially your cold events, you may want to include it, though sometimes people are just willing to buy that themselves. And then class supplies. So if you're running an event that includes classes and you want those classes to be free to the public, then you're going to have to cover the cost of those classes. And some of these, especially, we do a lot of leather work classes. They can really rack up in cost. So you do have to keep it in mind whether or not you want to cover that, or if you want to pass that cost along to your attendees. And the last thing with the basics of budgeting is in Winter's Edge, we have where anything that's not a site fee or insurance. So the site fee and insurance are excluded from this. There is a spending cap. It's set by the board of directors, and it is per I believe it's calendar year. So for this year, it is currently $2,500. So if you are setting up a bid, you have $2,500 to work with, and then the site cost and the site insurance are exempt from that, because you can't do anything about that. So that is something that you need to keep in mind the second you start working on a bid, is you have a budget that you can't go over. Then moving on. Meals are by far one of the biggest costs to an event, aside from the actual fees of using the site. Meals are going to be where the vast majority of your cost goes. Usually Saturday night feast is the most expensive meal. However, you can absolutely rack up a lot of cost in the others as well. Hydration is sometimes included under the feast budget. Sometimes it's separate. It really doesn't matter either way, because they're both going to go into that $2,500 you have to work with, but sometimes they're included together. When you are budgeting for your meals, you have to plan based off of where you're buying. So prices will change, and don't plan on maxing out, because you do need that safety net. And when it comes to where you're buying, it's also what's near the site. You may want to buy a lot of your supplies near where you live and drive them there. You may want to go pick up food once you've reached the area, and so you need to see what's nearby. Sales tax. That's another 10% in most states. So don't forget about it when you're budgeting, because when you're looking up prices of things online, it doesn't include that sales tax. So make sure that when you're adding things into your form, you have that 10% on there. Otherwise, you might get a rude awakening when you've suddenly spent more than you were allowed. And then to save money when you're trying to budget out these meals, buying in bulk, of course, is always, always, always better. A lot of your paper products are really easy to get in bulk, and they're a lot cheaper, but also food. And then the Kingdom has a couple of memberships to stores, but there are also public bulk stores that you can go to, like Restaurant Depot or Chef Store, Gordon Food Supply. Those all, you don't have to have a membership to get in, but ones that do, like Costco and Sam's Club, at almost every single event I've ever been to or run, there is someone who will let you use their Sam's Club or Costco card. So ask your friends, it helps. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and sometimes we can shop tax-free, so that'll save you that 10%. And when you're spending $1,000 to $2,000 on food, it definitely helps. So that's something that may require some paperwork through the Kingdom Monarchy, through the Prime Minister. Usually anytime that they've been asked, there's no issue getting that done, and it can save you a little bit of money. Grants are interesting. A lot of local and big chain grocery stores, they'll offer grants to groups that are doing events, and you say, hey, I'm running an event, here's kind of what the deal is, can you give me a grant? And then suddenly you've got a few $100s in gift cards that you can go spend at Publix to help run your event. Another option is groups may be willing to donate meals. The most often that I've seen it is in traveler feasts. That's a really big one that a lot of groups will take over, because it tends to be for a smaller number of people, since not everybody has arrived by Friday night. And so groups donating meals takes a whole big chunk out of what you've had to budget. It helps a lot. And if you're looking for people to try and do that, you can even look on Facebook. You can post and say, hey, I'm looking for a group who would be willing to run it. If you ask, a lot of the time, you'll get something. And then be reasonable when you're budgeting your meals. You're not going to have a surf and turf dinner, and make sure that you're using the things that you buy in the most effective ways. It's just, you have to be reasonable, because while $2,500 sounds like a lot, it's not when you've got 190 people to feed. This is an optional part of your bid. Most bids that have come in the last several years have included it, but you don't have to. It's not in the corpora that you'd have to, but I highly suggest it. It makes your bid more appealing. So they usually will include a budget for 75%, 100%, and 125% of the projected attendance for that event. So You can ask the KPM for this information. They will take the last 4 events, the last year, and they'll take that attendance, they'll average it, and that is your 100%. That's your projected attendance number. And then you simply make that 75%, 125%. And you want to budget based off of those numbers of people. And that sounds really hard, but a good spreadsheet does everything for you, and the template that I'm putting out for anybody who wants to use it does that for you. So you just fill in the 100% column, and then everything else calculates for you. Another that's often included is the number of attendees you would need to break even on your costs, and the number of attendees to hit at least a $500 profit. That's one that just kind of helps communicate the feasibility of your bid. You know, if you're not going to break even until you hit 200 people, and we've never hit 200 before, then that makes your bid look really not possible. And then per head cost, this is something that I do believe the template that is going to be shared includes. It just breaks down your cost into how much it's costing you per person, and it kind of helps you more easily understand how much you're spending and if you're going up or down as you adjust your numbers. It's just kind of a helpful little thing. It doesn't do much, but it is nice to see. And then you can compare it to the per head cost of other events in the past, and that kind of gives you an idea of if you're on the right track or if you're way out in left field. All right. And very last thing is making your bid appealing. You're not always going to be bidding by yourself. Sometimes there's going to be others against you. I would love it if we had a bunch of people bidding against each other for October. So the ways that you make your bid stand out. Fundraisers are great for this. They can, on one end, cut costs for your event and raise money for the kingdom, or they can help a worthy cause. We had a fundraiser recently that was for an individual in our kingdom who had been in a really bad accident. And so having a fundraiser to help him, it really did bring a lot of attention to the event and an attention to that bid. As for fundraisers, there's usually raffles, guessing games, and silent auctions are the 3 main ones. There's also Pie the Night. I forgot about that one. So those are all options for fundraisers that you can do. And if you think of other ones, please tell me. Have a reason for the money that you're spending. Don't just spend every dollar that you're allotted because you can. Make it intentional, because if the people looking over your bid see a bunch of frivolous spending on things that's not needed, you know, if you're spending $500 on decorations, that's just kind of silly, and it may not be picked over another event bid that is being more restrictive but is actually going to offer something to the people. Events should turn a profit. I mean, I know that we all hate to say it, but events are the way that the kingdom makes money. And so if they're looking over bids and they're very similar in a lot of ways, but one bid has a projected profit 2 times as high as the other one, that one might get picked. Especially if the CRAT teams are, you know, both very, very valid teams, then yeah, they're probably going to pick the one that has higher profit. And then the final thing is you can adjust your ticket prices. This is something that a lot of people have been woe to do, because the second we raise prices, it tends to be a big hot button problem. But things have gotten more expensive, groceries have gotten expensive, and so you can adjust your ticket prices. Typically, if you're going to go up, try to keep it within $5 of the last one, and it's less of a shock for people. But if you do adjust those prices, you need to make it worth it. Make your event good. Add different things to your event. Plan for classes. Plan for just better food, more additional events happening. There has to be some reason. I don't know if y'all can hear that, but a very large bird is outside my house. Sorry. I'm at the questions portion, and after questions, I do have some example bids from previous events that I'm going to show you guys. So, does anybody have any questions before I show you guys the examples? Okay, well, I'm going to get off of questions and show y'all these examples. So, this is the example template that we have made. Oh, yeah, okay, y'all can see it. So, this is the example template that we've made for y'all to use. Now, a lot of this is stuff that you may not have to fill out, such as this right-hand side. This is something that's for the Kingdom Prime Minister, but a lot of this is going to be gone over in the previous events, so I'm going to show you guys those. This is the bid that my husband gave, and I was on the Krat team. And so I've blacked out the names of the Krats, just in case, I guess. Except for Obscura, I guess I left her by accident. But essentially, your first page of your bid, you're going to want to list off your team. This will change. You know, this event had all of these additional Krats, but not every event does. So this will change as you need it. And then at the bottom, this was not filled in, but you will have teams outside of just your main Krat. So your gate Krat is going to need to recruit other people to sit at gate with them. So is your security Krat. If you're having quests, you're going to need NPCs. The Hydro Krat's going to need some help because lucking around all that water is a workout. So those teams don't need to be fully formed by the time you bid, but having your bid available so that you can go back and add those teams in just to kind of have a bit of records of what went on, of who volunteered, and so that you can organize your team is very helpful. So that's why it's got these little teams at the bottom. Now, the simplified budget, I know it doesn't look simple, but this is your main hub for where you're spending money. And this is what I was talking about with the attendance estimates. So the average of the last 4 events before this one was 149 people. So as we were filling things out, it was this 100% column that got filled in, and then everything else just calculated out. And now some of these didn't change. You know, the site, that's not going to change. The insurance, that's not going to change. These, like the raffles, these are estimates. So some of this changes, some of it doesn't. But as you fill these things in, that's going to help estimate your profit, how much you're spending per person, and how much you're spending in general. And then you can fill in the actual amounts that you spent as you go. And so that just kind of helps you figure out if you're going to come in at a safe amount, or if, unfortunately, you might have to dip into the 5% emergency fund. Don't count on that emergency fund, but it does exist. This area down here at the bottom, this was a breakdown of the different prices for the tickets of the event, as well as how that gets affected with Square fees, because if we do take payments through Square, that does adjust how much money we actually make. And then it broke down the amount of money that we would make off of that number of attendees. These at the bottom are a little bit more in depth, but these are essentially your fixed expenses. That's going to be, like I said, predominantly your site and your site insurance. Variable cost, mostly food, but also your supplies, your game supplies, your hydration, your favors. That variable cost per head, that's just how much you're spending on each person when you ignore the site cost. So that can be kind of interesting to keep track of, but it's really not that important. Break-even point, so that's saying if we make no money from the fundraiser and we spend everything that we planned on spending, we need 137 people to come to the event to actually break even. And then, of course, the $500 profit is pretty self-explanatory. This down here at the bottom is something that was just done for this particular event to kind of keep track of how much we were spending on food. And then other budget. This is not often used that much, but they just kind of listed out some miscellaneous supplies that they knew they were going to need to buy. They didn't even include prices. You don't have to, but just knowing that you are going to have to deal with those supplies. And then on the budget, they do include miscellaneous as a $200, so that goes into, you know, the toilet paper, the paper towels, dish soap, all those things. Hydration. It gets really expensive. I know water seems cheap, but if you're buying a lot of bottled water and not utilizing as many of the 5-gallon jugs, bottled water can actually get really pricey. You probably want at least some bottles, just because, you know, people don't always bring their reusables. But definitely pushing people to bring those reusables and having those 5-gallon jugs can cut down on your hydration costs. And then meals. This one looks insane. That's because I did it. This is the feast that I ran. So I actually priced these out individually. You absolutely don't have to do this. This is something that I did for my own planning. I will show you another one that makes a lot more sense. Deadlines, this is just something that you can fill in after. This is not something that needs to be submitted in your bid, but it's nice to just have this one Google sheet that you can go back to, and you can see all of your costs and you can see your plan, and the schedule is often included on the bid just so you know what's going on. So having everything kind of in one location, it really does help. As for another example, you'll see it looks very similar. They have their team, they have their simplified budget, and then their other budget breakdown, they actually included the estimated cost of a lot of these different supplies. And those are things that do add up, so you definitely do want to include them. They also had their hydration costs over here. You'll notice that for both the last one and this one, hydration costs were estimated possibly at over $200. So definitely don't overlook it. Meals. They didn't price things out at all. They had what the meals were going to be. Just 4 labels and what drinks they were going to offer. How they priced out their meals is under the simplified budget. For 120 people, they had $1,200 to work with. 160, $1,500 to work with. 200, $1,875. That's how they chose to budget their meals rather than breaking them down into individually. And that's perfectly valid. You do not have to break them down in the crazy way that I did. That was more for shopping than it was anything else. You can absolutely do that if you're worried about your food costs. If your feast crack comes back to you with a crazy idea for some really extravagant food and you want to know how on earth they're going to make that happen, then yeah, you might want to price it out individually. But this way that this group did it, where they just listed out what the food was and had 3 numbers for the possible amount of money they were going to spend, that is perfectly sufficient. And those are the examples. A lot of this is, it looks crazy, but I promise you it's not, because so much of this gets filled out the second you start adding things. So say your number of attendees, you're thinking 125 and then 140 and then let's say 175. Those numbers probably don't work at all. Suddenly a lot of this is getting filled out for you, and so it really is not as hard as it seems, because the code does almost all the work for you. See, suddenly you've got an estimated profit and you've got your per head costs all figured out for you. It's already figured out your breakdowns and your variable costs. So these templates, it does so much of the work for you. There really is no reason to be afraid to bid. And that is where I am going to call it. So I'll ask one more time. Does anyone have any questions about how to bid on an event? Anything specific that maybe you're considering bidding and you have a question? Please let me know.
Small question, at least for I guess with the portioning out for meals. Um, do you guys? So how do you guys do it with the Winter's Edge when you guys apportion out? Do you guys still do 3 meals with travelers, breakfast, or I'm sorry, 4 meals, breakfast, lunch, and then feast on Saturday, or how do you guys do it normally?
Yes, that is typically how we do things. Frankly, I can't think of one where we didn't, unless it was a longer event back when we used to have them. But yeah, almost all of our events nowadays are travelers on Friday, and then you've got breakfast, lunch, dinner. Now, some feast crats have started to include a standing snack that just kind of stays available throughout the day, and it has helped a lot, especially if there's any issues that come up with food. So they'll have, maybe an area where there's some fresh fruit throughout the day that people can come and snack on, or anything like that. So that is an option to include, but as far as full meals, you got it.
I was just seeing because I've been noticing it with some of the other kingdoms because well, I was just in the CK for Spring War back in March, and it was interesting to see how they kind of not necessarily cut costs, but are more like where they take like efficient cuts. So they'll do like things like walking tacos, or like just trying to figure out how to kind of get the money to function, like get it to actually kind of like add up for feast. Because that was honestly it's the big thing that's been kind of stopping me from doing it,
Oh, yeah.
because I feel like it's one of those things where it feels like you never know how many people you're gonna have. you don't know how much to plan for, and it's that's been one of the things that's been scaring me now from doing it.
Yeah. And those attendance estimates are really the big thing that help with that because you're using that last year's worth of data. So you plan on that 100% number. And then also pushing your pre registration really, really helps understand how much you need to buy. And of course, what your budget is going to end up being. Because if you're suddenly getting a massive amount of pre-reg and you've had more pre-reg than anybody else ever has, yeah, you're probably going to have a lot of people show up. But definitely, also, things don't have to be fancy. People have been perfectly happy in the past with hamburgers and hot dogs for lunch. And
Mhm.
things like you said, like walking tacos and things like that. Not everything has to be crazy. I mean, we had a recent event where we had sandwiches for lunch, and people were over the moon about the food for that event because they were able to cut down on lunch and then put more into dinner.
Yep. It's been honestly, I've kind of noticed with Neverwinter we kind of have that as well, where we'll end up having like a bit of a lighter lunch, so the dinner can kind of be a little bit more extravagant,
Yeah,
or like travelers be a little bit on the lighter side as well.
yeah, absolutely. And that's
But
the
I
whole
do love
point of
the idea of
travelers.
snacks. Yep. But the idea of like the standing snacks, so like having like oranges or like bananas or anything like that for those who get like dehydrated, it's a really interesting idea. I think I might want to take back as well.
Yeah. Yeah, those can be great. The only things that you do want to consider whenever you have standing snacks and things like that is potential allergies. I know we in Winter's Edge have a couple of individuals with very potent allergies to things like apples or citrus fruits, or even some latex allergies. And of course, that comes into play with bananas. So
Yeah,
you do want to keep those in mind. You don't have to completely avoid them, but it's making people aware of what's going to be there. And if you are dealing with somebody who has such potent allergies, then yeah, you may want to pick different items.
makes sense. Absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
I appreciate you putting on this class, by the way.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Yeah, frankly, it's because I want people to bid for October. Um, and so if I can get people to not be scared of it, then maybe they'll do it.